Well, today, Anthony Albanese announced the appointment of a new cybersecurity coordinator to head up the National Office for Cybersecurity. They'll be responsible for overseeing cyber threats amid last year's Optus and Medibank hacks. The Prime Minister attended a roundtable meeting today.
Clearly, as it stands, government policies and regulations, business sector systems and measures are simply not at the level that we need them to be.
Joining me now to discuss this and more is the Australian's chief political correspondent, Geoff Chambers. Geoff, so great to have you with us. So what did Albanese actually announce today, and what is this cybersecurity coordinator going to do to protect us from the sort of major hacks we've seen in the past couple of years?
So I think the reality in cutting through the spin around the announcement is that this coordinator's job will be more about corralling the bureaucracy and where the funding is going, because currently all of our cyber agencies are spread across 4 departments. So you've got the Australian Signals Directorate, which is our frontline spy, online cyber spy agency, the Australian Cyber Security Centre, also at Defence. You've got Home Affairs Department leading critical infrastructure, and then you've got E-Safety Commission under Department of Communications. So we've got this perennial issue which has frustrated business to no end, where you've got all these cyber assets spread across different parts of the bureaucracy. When we're talking about dealing with the direct threats that we're seeing emanating out of China and Russia, that still remains firmly in the field of the ASD, which is Rachel Noble's agency. And again, the reality is, as much as we talk about what Australia can do in terms of being a world leader when it comes to enhancing our cyber defences, we're still very heavily reliant on our Five Eyes partners, namely the US and the UK, when we're really seeing these threats emerging from China, Russia, Eastern Europe, North Korea and Iran to a lesser extent.
Yeah, you're right that they really do need to ensure that information is coordinated across all the agencies, because that has been a major problem. And we just saw it most recently with the issue of the Chinese spy cameras. No one was taking responsibility for letting the rest of government know that these cameras were a serious cybersecurity threat. Now, Geoff, staying with the Prime Minister for a moment, this is a topic that's been on the minds of just about every Australian with a superannuation balance. Well, Anthony Albanese was on the project on Sunday night, and he seemed to back away completely from his Treasurer's comments over the past week, and he actually said that any changes to super are just hypothetical at this stage. Have a look.
We've had no changes. We're not here announcing changes. We are, of course, having a discussion about the purpose of superannuation. And, you know, this is all hypothetical. So if we make an announcement, then you can scrutinise what that announcement is. But we've made it very clear that no decisions have been made.
I mean, hypothetical. The Treasurer literally held a press conference to put this on the table to discuss it. It's been a bit of a disaster, the way this has been handled over the past week. What do you think?
I think there's a really interesting dynamic emerging inside government where Anthony Albanese gives a green light to Jim Chalmers, Stephen Jones and others to go out there and fly their favourite coloured kite. We saw this last year with the talk about trimming back stage 3 tax cuts, and that dragged on for a couple of weeks, and then the Prime Minister came out and knocked that on the head. When it comes to this talk of super changes, I think when we come to the May 9 budget, I wouldn't be surprised if there is very minimal changes when it comes to super to ensure that they can, obviously look towards the next election without carrying that on their backs. And with the Labor Party, there's so many internal factions and so much pressure from different elements that it's very interesting to see play out. But I think that the Prime Minister's comments overnight was a good indicator that they're not going to push this thing too far. But rolling ERC meetings continue towards the budget, so I guess it's a wait and see, but I'm sure that they don't want this hanging around all the way to the budget.
Yeah, or definitely not all the way to the next election. But they are going to have to find, well, if they want to deal with inflation in the budget, they're going to have to find some areas to cut back on, unless they're going to have another budget that has a net spending growth like they did in October last year. Now, I want to
they've really just on that, Sharri. They've really got to stop tinkering around the edges. They're talking about these massive structural deficit problems, these spending blowouts, and record debt levels. This is tinkering around the edges. And it's going towards the savings of Australians. They really need to do the hard work, and that we need to see a real clear plan around tackling that on May 9.
Yeah, we'll have to see how tough the Razor Gang actually is this time. Now, Geoff, the latest news poll in the Australian newspaper shows the New South Wales Premier Dominic Perrottet is still in the lead as preferred Premier, so he's made up a lot of ground here against Labor's Chris Minns by 10 points. Look, Perrottet was falling well behind before, and this comes as the Coalition introduces its new policies to what it says. It claims it'll bolster first home ownership by offering first home buyers the option of paying paying land tax instead of stamp duty. What's your take on how this policy is going to affect the election and just how close Chris Minns is to becoming Premier? Because while Perrottet has made up a lot of ground, look, his primary figures, it's, according to the news poll, it's still 37%. He can't win from that position.
Oh, look, I think Chris Minns and Labor are still in the box seat. We've had 12 years of Liberal rule in New South Wales and plenty of scandals along the way as well. We always expect to see those polls tighten, and in particular at those state elections where there's a different approach, I guess, from voters. And voters right now got so much on their plate around cost of living. We've got interest rates at their highest levels in more than a decade. We've got a rent crisis out there as well. So I just wonder, from a voter perspective, the cynicism when they hear governments at any level telling them that they're going to help them buy a house. This has not, particularly in this environment, I think they've got more things on their minds, whether it's paying the energy bill, paying the grocery bill, putting fuel in their cars. I'm very sceptical that this is actually going to sway someone in terms of how they vote come election day. And also, I think in that news, And
also giving people the option, or young, first home buyers, the option of stamp duty or land tax that might target and help young people trying to buy a home. But then you'd have people at the other end of the spectrum, because Perrottet says that once a property is a land tax property, it's always a land tax property. So then you're looking at, people retiring who'd be worried about never being able to pay off their home.
I think that's a huge issue. And let's cut through all the spin. At the end of the day, we need more land supply, and we need to stop the roundtables and reviews that we see at all levels of government. We need to remove those regulatory burdens and stop taxing everyone. I mean, it's not rocket science. We've been having this perennial discussion around housing for so long, and now we're facing labour shortages, building material shortages, and the interest rate impact, which is going to really smash the building industry. So they need to put those incentives in place, and they need to actually unlock land and build more supply.
Yeah. Now, Qantas announced record profits of more than $1 billion last week off the back of a rebuilding plan by Alan Joyce, long-term CEO. But there's a brilliant piece, in my opinion, brilliant, in the Australian Financial Review by Joe Aston today that actually goes through how Qantas took more than $850 million in JobKeeper government funding during the pandemic. It hasn't had to pay that back, yet it still won't pay company tax now. $1.4 billion in before-tax profit isn't a bad result for any company, let alone an airline. And it comes at a time when, you just have to listen to Talkback Radio to know this. So many people are disappointed with the service that Qantas has been providing in the past year.
When you talk about public sentiment, obviously the gas companies have taken a hit in the last little bit, but I think Qantas is right up there. I think there's a lot of frustration in terms of the delivery of services, cancelled flights, and then you see these bumper profits come through. And I think it's really important that Qantas doesn't take advantage of its tag as the national carrier. We saw so many airlines crash during the pandemic. And the fact is taxpayers bailed out Qantas, kept them afloat, and they have to, repay that faith shown in them. And I also think just in terms of the Labor government, they've talked a big talk around multinational tax reform. In terms of what we've seen around those reforms and the return that we're getting on them, I think that they have to be more serious in terms of how they approach any quirks in the system where these big companies aren't paying what they should be paying.
Yeah. Geoff Chambers, thank you very much for your thoughts tonight. We'll see you soon.